to ask from you, and you need to react, all right? Number one, Hellboy 3? Good. They're listening. They're listening. No, and at the Mountains of Madness? Tell me. Now, it's over. Thank you very fucking much.
Hellboy is a comic strip superhero created by writer and artist Mike Mignola. Mignola's Hellboy universe has expanded in a succession of miniseries, collections, and standalone stories and novels. Mignola's comic universe was brought to the big screen by director Guillermo del Toro in 2004's Hellboy. The live-action feature film starred Ron Perlman as the title hero, in part based on Mignola's Hellboy Seed of Destruction, written by John Byrne. The 4 issues were published from March to May of 1994. The film opens in the waning days of World War II, as the Nazis, together with Rasputin, open a portal to hell. The evil scheme is thwarted in the nick of time by the Allied forces, and nothing comes through the interdimensional portal except an impish bright red baby with horns and a tail. The little demon is raised by the Allies into a wisecracking, dry-witted, gun-toting, cigar-chomping, trench-coat-wearing demon hunter and paranormal investigator. Housed by the FBI, Hellboy will save the Earth from evil when the Nazis look to resume their plans to initiate an apocalypse. Del Toro and Perlman return for the superior sequel, the visually stunning Hellboy II: The Golden Army, in which the heroes do battle against a new enemy, the hateful of humans, Prince Nuarder Silverlance, played by British singer Luke Goss. Released in 2008 to a positive reception, it seemed at this point that the stage was all set for Hellboy 3 and the completion of a Hellboy trilogy. Immediately following the release of Hellboy 2, Del Toro already had ideas for Part 3, but the decision was one the studio would need to make. He said, "Unfortunately, I don't have the millions in the bank to make the decision, but if it was up to me, I would love to finish the story of this incarnation of Hellboy in a rather bittersweet way." Del Toro described his ideas as heartbreaking. He wanted each part to have its own identity, in that the first one was very pulpy, the second one was very oriented to fairy tales and aspects of the mythology, and very comedic, and Part 3 would be essentially the end of days, a story that would be very grand, operatic, and quite tragic. He said it would need to happen the right way. Every time we do a Hellboy movie, we feel we've gotten one more than we deserve the chance to get. They go against the grain of the superhero movie a lot. Usually, superhero movies are fantasy fulfillment, where the heroes are very straight, very morally powerful, black and white entities. Hellboy is very flawed. It's completely consciously against the grain. If we do it right, there should be bittersweet feelings when Hellboy destroys a monster. We make an effort to make it a little more uncomfortable. Del Toro said that one of the factors in not getting started was that he felt Ron Perlman was very reluctant to do it again because of the 6 to 7 hour makeup jobs. In 2010, he said, "A website called Den of Geeks started a petition, and it really meant a lot to Ron that people were signing it. You know, he's not invulnerable to the charms of fandom, and I would love nothing more than to finish that story. But without Ron, there is no Hellboy." In 2012, a 6-year-old boy, Zachary, had expressed to Make-A-Wish his desire to meet and become Hellboy. The little boy was undergoing treatment for leukemia, and Perlman would get back into full makeup and spend the whole day with the young fan. When asked by Entertainment Weekly whether or not this had whetted his appetite to complete the trilogy, Perlman said, "Everything that was done in both movies was leading up to this destiny, written in stone, of what Hellboy has been summoned to Earth to do. And that to not do it, particularly in light of the scope that Guillermo is thinking of for the Resolve, would be in my mind a little bit of a shame." The following year, website Shock Till You Drop reported that Hellboy 3 could be picked up at Legendary Studios, as during promotion on Pacific Rim, the actor and director had taken a meeting with the studio's chairman Thomas Tull, and that Perlman had raised the subject of Hellboy 3. Perlman told Ryan Turek about the meeting, saying, "Not just anybody can make this movie. I loved working for Legendary, and I know for Guillermo, working on Pacific Rim was one of his greatest experiences. The reason I loved working for them is because Guillermo was so happy. I came in 6 months into the shoot and he seemed as fresh as a daisy, simply because he was working for someone who appreciated and supported his outlandish visions and what he wanted to put on the screen. My immediate silent wish was, wouldn't it be great if these guys came in and helped resolve the Hellboy series? Del Toro would add, I hate giving pieces about it, but last night we were at dinner and Ron said, I would be very happy to do Hellboy again. When are we doing Hellboy 3? Thomas said, I would love to see Hellboy 3. He didn't say he would love to do it, he just said he'd like to see it, but today, I'll ask him.
Have you talked about Hellboy 3? Has that come up?
Last time we had dinner, we talked about Hellboy 3, and he said, well, I thought you didn't want to do it. I said, well, I thought you didn't want to do it. So it's one of those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, we blame each other, but the reality is that in one dinner he says, I don't want to do it, and then another dinner he says, you want to do it? I go, I think if we can, every Hellboy movie is a huge struggle. Yeah. The first one was a huge struggle to get to 50 million. Yeah. And we were trying to make a $90 million movie with 50. Then the second one, we were trying to make a $200 million movie with 80. Yeah. And the box office has been solid, and they made their money back and more, but it's not been so overwhelming that I can go. The third one would need to be huge, over 100, and I don't think there's a studio on earth that will go and really give us those tools and the freedom. Yeah. Because it's a pretty dark. The third one is.
You're going in that direction.
It's a much darker movie. So, what I don't want to do is get into the politics of that, and then the movie is not what I want it to be. But we'll see. I mean, I'll work with Ron for the rest of my life.
I think we need a couple more meals. Do you want to do it? Yeah, I'll do it. What the hell? You want to do it?
We'll chip in for that meal if you want to. If we want to get to that point, we'll help you out. Well, your dance card's pretty full, so where would you fit it in? I mean, that's the thing.
but the dance card. I mean, look at Mountains. Yeah. The dance card is bullshit. I mean, what's next after Pacific Rim? I don't know. Yeah. Do you?
No, I don't.
You do.
Ron Perlman would mention the project to Del Toro over the next 2 years. They had walked away from Hellboy 2, agreeing that there would never be another one. But with the passage of time, it became clear to Perlman that Del Toro had always designed it as a trilogy, and that the director had a very well-articulated idea of what Part 3 would look like. Perlman would say, it's amazingly theatrical and is epic in scope and would make for amazing cinema, with or without the first 2 movies. But there are so many questions posed in the first 2 films that absolutely need to be answered. I said, you owe it to the world to finish this trilogy. I'm pushing 70, so we better do this soon. Perlman would also tell reporters that, every time I'm with Guillermo, it certainly occupies a small portion of the conversation. And believe me, when we walked away from Hellboy 2, both of us had the snot beaten out of us to the degree that neither of us wanted to ever see Hellboy again. Then about a year went by, and I realized we had asked the fans to invest so much in this saga. And the saga really is about how it resolves, because this force has been summoned into the universe, and the Oracle says, non-negotiably, that he's going to destroy the Earth, and he's been nurtured to be this force of good. So for the third installment, it was always about the third. I said, Guillermo, I know what a heavy lift it'll be. I know it'll have to be twice as expensive as the first 2 put together. I think there's a chance. Both Guillermo and I want to do it. Selma Blair and Doug Jones, too. It's just a question of finding someone who thinks there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Another year would pass with still no word on any green light for the project, and Del Toro began to rack up a long list of projects in development, including a Van Helsing movie, plus At the Mountains of Madness, plus a Peter Pan remake. There was an MCU Incredible Hulk TV show that Del Toro had spent a year developing. Not to mention, the director was also working on adapting fresh takes on Frankenstein and Beauty and the Beast, and it seemed that Del Toro was exceptionally and eternally busy. However, the studio was still interested and hoped the film would come to fruition, which would in turn cancel plans for a Prince Nuarder spin-off titled Hellboy Silverlance. That movie would have centered around Abraham Sapien and would have shown Prince Nuarder in different time zones down the centuries. The movie would have showed Nuarder's first meeting with Mr. Wink in Spain during the Spanish Inquisition, and Nuarder in Nazi Germany in World War II, engineering a pact to keep various supernatural entities unharmed from the conflict. Actor Doug Jones would have been playing twin characters of both Abe and a reprise of the Angel of Death, with whom Prince New Order strikes a bargain. Agent Myers from the first Hellboy film would have returned. The Hellboy character would have featured a brief cameo, similar to Ben Affleck's Batman in The Suicide Squad. The screenplay reached a rousing action climax at the BPRD Colorado headquarters and used Rasputin's summoning gauntlet from the first movie. If it had been successful, it would have been the first in a series of From the Files of the BPRD projects. Hellboy Silverlance was scrapped in favor of concentrating on Hellboy 3, which, as we now know, wouldn't happen either, resulting in 2 canceled movies. In an interview with the magazine Sci-Fi Now, Ron Perlman was reminded that very shortly after Hellboy 2 had wrapped, he was quoted as saying, "I'm sick and tired, and I'm sick, and I'm tired." He was asked at what point did he change his mind about Hellboy 3. He answered, "Well, the good news is I'm no longer sick or tired. And the really good news is, whatever whooped my ass, as well as Guillermo's ass and everybody else who worked on Hellboy 2, is long behind me and forgotten now." The only thing that stands out about the whole experience is that Hellboy was always meant to be a trilogy. We set up a set of circumstances for the fans and for the Hellboy faithful who stayed in there for the first 2 films to find out about this non-negotiable destiny of Hellboy being brought to Earth to destroy the world and how it was going to play out. Short of actually giving the world that final resolve, I really don't feel that our work is done. I've discussed this at length with Guillermo, who agrees with me, even though he continues to point out what a heavy lift it would be to get the resources to make it. I said, well, tougher things have been done, but when you're doing them for the right reasons, they just become labors of love. So why don't we both use whatever political capital we have and see if we can make this happen? So I think he's coming around to it as well. I think Guillermo was worried that I was so adamant about ever putting the makeup on again, because the second movie was really tough. It was tough for both of us, and we walked away from it really, really tired. So I think he was more worried that he didn't want to screw up a great friendship over a movie, but I'm convincing him now that he has nothing to worry about. Promoting Pacific Rim, Del Toro told Collider that, "It's very unlikely it'll happen because you need things to converge so strongly. Larry Gordon, Universal, the rights, Ron and mine's availability, Mike Mignola's blessing. We have pieces of that, but we don't have all of that. You need so many things to confluence, and then you need about $150 million. In terms of completing the story in comic book form, Del Toro said, "I talked to Mike about making it a comic, and Mike said very clearly, Hellboy the movie is yours. Hellboy the comic is mine. I don't want to confuse them." He has been very clear about not bringing any mythology we did in the movies into the comics, like Cronin being a mechanical clockwork zombie Nazi, or the Samaritan, which is not called the Samaritan in the comics, or Big Baby, or Abe Sapien being like the character he is in the movies, which is different. In the comics, he's a hard-ass. Abe Sapien is really a tough guy, and in the movie, he's like this sensitive, mind-reading fish man. So Mike is very careful. No love story between Liz and Hellboy, so on and so forth. Actor Jeffrey Tambor, who played the FBI chief in the story, would tell US TV that there was talk of making Hellboy 3, saying, "But they better hurry or I'm going to be in a walker."
I'd like to keep it. I'd like to not keep it going. I'd like to finish it though. I'd like for there to be a third film because the first 2 films were set up for this huge resolve. And he already understands what that resolve will kind of look like. And he never gave me the nuts and bolts of it, but he gave me a rather broad stroke sketch of what the third film would look like. And it's so epic. And it's so deserved by the fans who hung in there for the first 2 that I really feel as though it's essential that we make it. And so I fight for it every day. And sometimes I'm the only voice, and sometimes, there are others, but I'm never going to stop trying to get Hellboy 3 made.
The following week, during a Reddit Ask Me Anything, Del Toro was asked, "Any Hellboy 3 details you can share?" He wrote, "Well, we don't have that movie on the horizon, but the idea for it was to have Hellboy finally come to terms with the fact that his destiny, his inevitable destiny, is to become the beast of the apocalypse, and having him and Liz face this that part of his nature, and he has to do it. in order to be able to, ironically, vanquish the foe that he has to face in the third film. He has to become the beast of the apocalypse to be able to defend humanity. But at the same time, he becomes a much darker being. It's a very interesting ending to the series, but I don't think it will happen. In the summer of 2015, as Ron Perlman served as a judge at the Monte Carlo TV Festival, he would speak to Variety and say, "People are still asking me about Hellboy 3, so I guess it's still news. But I'll tell you the same thing I've been telling everyone else. The Hellboy saga was meant to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that, if you were loyal enough to us when you came in and watched both those 2 movies that we made, we owe you a resolve. And there will come a time where he will have to live up to his destiny, which is to be the beast of the apocalypse. Or if he has to suppress that destiny by sacrificing himself in some way, so as not to destroy mankind, but do the opposite." And that's the discussion of the third film. I think it's a discussion worth having, and I think something we owe the fans, and I'm being very clear about that. It's in Guillermo's head, and he shared enough of it with me to know that it will be mind-blowing. I mean, it will be mind-blowing. It'll be great cinema. And if you're somebody who followed the first 2 movies, it will be even more mind-blowing because we have something. If you like the first one and the second one, we have something really rock'em shock'em in the third one. In the second film, the character of Liz is revealed to be pregnant with Hellboy's child after being touched by Abe Sapien by mistake while he shields her from harm. At the end of the film, it is revealed she is actually pregnant with twins, much to Hellboy's shock. Then, in an interview with Empire magazine, Perlman spoke of the plot for Part 3. He said, "Guillermo told me what the resolve of the trilogy would look like, in broad strokes, and it's such an amazingly theatrical, cinematic idea that I found it essential that we do it. He's the beast of the apocalypse. He has to take down civilization. He has to. It's non-negotiable. That's the foundation for the story, and that's why I think it would be a shame if we don't do it. The 2 twins, one would look like the mom and one would look like the dad. And one of them was going to be completely corrupt, and the other one, angelic. Which one was which? Only Guillermo would make the messed up looking one be the angel. So then, that adds to the saga." Del Toro would tell the Daily Beast in 2015, "The hard fact is that the movie's going to need about $120 million, and there's nobody knocking down doors to give it to us. It would be great to complete the trilogy, but in a way, I don't see the world, the industry, supporting the idea." In January 2017, Del Toro tweeted an informal poll asking his followers if they'd like to see Hellboy 3. "The Hellboy 3 is our chance to vote the right way in 2017. If 100,000 votes come in 24 hours, I promise to have a sit-down with Perlman and Mignola." The 2 options in the poll were yes and hell yes, with hell yes winning by a massive landslide. Perlman would tell IGN that, "Guillermo shared with me what the third and final installment would look like, and it's incredibly theatrical. It's highly charged. It's got huge dynamic to it, and it's very cinematic. And on top of that, it's the deal we made with the public by making installments 1 and 2. Clearly, we're not finished. We're not finished until we find out whether this guy is going to meet his destiny or whether he's going to find a way to avoid it. So that's what the third installment would be, and that's why I got on my soapbox saying, we owe it to the fans, and it's essential that we finish this. It's too good an idea not to do. And so I will now shut my mouth and leave it up to the gods and the fates." Perlman would also note that $120 million was a small budget compared to some of the big tentpole movies that are being made at studios, yet nobody is prepared to bankroll the budget. A few weeks later, all speculation, along with any remaining hope, would come to an end. The bad news was confirmed once and for all by the director on his Twitter account. He tweeted, "Hellboy 3, sorry to report, spoke with all parties. Must report that 100% the sequel will not happen. And that is to be the final thing about it. Hellboy may move into a different direction. Heartbroken, but not up to me. I, for one, wish everyone involved the best of luck." In May 2017, Mignola announced on his personal Facebook page that a reboot, then titled Hellboy: Rise of the Blood Queen, would be directed by Neil Marshall and star David Harbour as the eponymous character. Mignola also stated that the film would have an R rating. Mignola would explain the project initially started life as a sequel to The Golden Army, but the plans soon changed. He said, "I would have loved to see Guillermo do his third movie and finish that story. But over the years, it became very clear that wasn't going to happen. About 3 years ago, the producers, the screenwriter Andrew Crosby, and I all started working on this new story. Del Toro didn't want to have anything to do with it. He wasn't going to direct. He was offered to be a producer, and Ron Perlman wouldn't do it without Guillermo. So we originally started trying to tie it to the Del Toro universe and continue those movies. But once we had Neil Marshall, we thought, why are we going to try and continue that universe? Because a Del Toro movie is a Del Toro movie. And you don't want to try and hand a Del Toro movie to someone else, especially someone as great as Neil Marshall. So that's when it went from being this continuation to being a reboot. It's exciting to have another director. It's exciting to take another path, to take that material and give it another leaning. Mignola would also give the thumbs down to Del Toro's suggestion of possibly using his intended plot Part 3 in a one-off graphic novel. The Hellboy creator would say, I think Del Toro mentioned it to me once, and I said no. I think let the comics be the comics. Comics are confusing enough for people. Let's not have two different versions of the Hellboy comics out there. My vote would be no. The Hellboy reboot grossed $44.7 million worldwide during its original theatrical run, which, when offset against a $50 million production budget, was considered a disappointment. David Harbour would say via Instagram that, I think it failed before we began shooting, because I think that people didn't want us to make the movie. Guillermo del Toro and Ron Perlman created this iconic thing that we thought could be reinvented, and then fans certainly, the loudness of the internet was like, we do not want you to touch this. And then we made a movie that I think is fun, and I think had its problems, but it was a fun movie. And then people were just very, very against it. And that's people's right, but I learned my lesson in a lot of different ways. An article published on the popular website Film School Rejects would get Del Toro's attention. The article would detail how the first two Hellboy movies were ahead of their time in terms of the comic book boom that would dominate cinema and studio production slates soon after. The director would respond in a series of tweets, explaining, what allowed the two films to exist is gone. The Blu-ray DVD performance of the first Hellboy was massive. So big that Ben Feingold at Columbia went full-on on the sequel development. Ben was so impressed by those numbers that he made Hellboy one of the very first Blu-rays from Columbia Pictures. Far as I can recall, the number for home video surpassed theatrical. The movie is one of my top 5 I have directed. The first Hellboy movie was developed before even X-Men was on film. I remember visiting Mystery Men's set to try to convince Universal to greenlight it. It languished for a long time. To my mind, the first Blade was instrumental in showing how superhero movies could exist. At the end of the 20th century, there was a collision of Dark City and Blade that somehow, in subtle ways, paved the way via anime for Matrix to explode into the world. But still, back then it was a counter-movement to try and do superhero films, especially with the material that didn't have Marvel numbers. For many years, to me, the proto-comic book movie was Verhoeven's RoboCop in so many ways. As recently as June 2021, Perlman would say, I did make it clear that if there was a possibility of ending the trilogy with Guillermo, as we had done the first two films, and in view of what he had in mind in terms of closing all circles, that is something that I would consider doing it. And that leads us to now. The reboot killed off Del Toro's proposed trilogy, and the talk of pretending the reboot never existed and resuming with Perlman's Hellboy seems interesting but unworkable. The route of telling Part 3 in comic book form has been slapped down, and so it seems we're left in limbo, with nothing more than a few ideas, a potential storyline, and imagery that now only exists in Del Toro's mind's eye. There's clearly a sense of unfinished business for all concerned with the original movie, and a trilogy is something that a lot of Hellboy fans were desperate to see. It's a shame. There's no denying it would have been an epic and fitting conclusion to the saga. But for now, all we can do is imagine and ponder as it takes place in the super void of unrealized ideas. And that just about wraps up the brief timeline and history of the Hellboy 3 that never was. As always, thanks for watching.